This continues an interview with Delbert Marks on February 20th, 2004 at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville, Tennessee with Kurt Peeler and
Lindsay Chandler.
And you were saying about the weapons that every Marine knows how to fire the range of weapons.
Yeah, even down to the detail of a .45 pistol.
Mm-hmm.
They even, you know how to break it down, and sometimes you do it blindfolded. You know how to break them down and what have you, and how to fire them.
Could you talk just a little bit about, since it sounds like you remember this fairly well, you didn't grow up with a family of hunting or with guns.
No.
Could you talk a little bit about your weapons training and your use of weapons that you remember? Anything that's...
Well, I know in basic, of course, we had the M1 rifle, and I was a sharpshooter,
Mm-hmm.
which was pretty good. I think 210 out of up to 210 to 220. I was in that range there, which is sharpshooter. And they teach you how to Kentucky windage and land for so much and distance and this type of thing. So I remember at 500 yards, I got 10 straight bullseye at 500 yards with the M1 rifle, which is pretty good. So I was just one of the old country boys. Usually country boys does better as far as that, because most of them do hunt.
But you hadn't hunted.
But I had.
Yeah, so you really learned to shoot also that sounds like the Marine Corps way.
Yeah, it is Marine Corps way, right. So most of them they teach the same way, whether
Yeah.
you're heavy experience or not before. So they do a very good, thorough job of teaching you how to handle the weapons. And we had a lot of bayonet, and they had, we called it jiu-jitsu
Mm-hmm.
then. They called it something else, kung fu or something now. But we had even some of that training, you know. And usually it's very rare that you have hand-to-hand combat, but you got to make sure you're ready if you do.
What did they tell you about the North Korean and Chinese enemy? Because you mentioned they didn't tell you anything about being a prisoner.
Well, we knew that they were communists, and we knew that communism was bad, and so we that was our incentive.
Yeah,
right there.
yeah. They didn't really go.
They didn't go in detail.
Yeah.
And we knew that the Russians had come in and took North Korea and then turned North Korea into a communist, and North Korea started the war.
Yeah.
And of course it wound up as a stalemate, but yet we did our job by them not taking South Korea, you know.
Now you had joined the Marines in January of '51. I mean, a lot had happened in the Korean War
prior to that. Yeah, the Marines and Chosin Recipe,
Yeah.
you know, they got caught up there, and all them guys, and I knew some of them later on, and this Chesty Puller was one of them. He was one of the big...
Did you meet Chesty was a prisoner?
No, he wasn't a prisoner.
That's right. It's World War II that he becomes a...
Maybe so.
Yeah.
But he was wound up as Brigadier General.
Yeah.
I believe. But he was a famous Marine.
Yeah.
He was all guts and glory. And he's one of them that led them out
Yeah.
of the Chosin deal up there. And I knew some of them that was POWs that got captured. And they still have the Chosin Few group
Oh, yeah.
that meet.
Yeah.
Separately than we do, but they when we have our convention or something, they're there too, and I knew some of them. And it's one of them, this Ed Jones, and I'll tell you about later. He went through all that Chosin deal, and he got back and got out of there, and then 2 weeks later he got captured, and he was ready to go home within a week, and they got captured. Right back up to North Korea went, and all that cold weather, what he just went through and all that. And I mean, cold. It got like 40 below, and one winter like 50 below. I mean,
What's interesting, I mean, the cold weather, I didn't realize that until I did at Celebrate Freedom. So people talked about their time in service and how cold it was.
See, Russia borders Korea, and that's a Siberia, Russia.
Yeah.
And all that cold's coming off of there. And I mean, those Yalu River, I mean, it freezes over like 5 feet thick. You can drive a tank across there, you know. So it's pretty cold.
When did you get any leave to go home? When did you?
I got 10 days after basic. And then I didn't come back home then until the war was over. And then I had about 3 more months, and I was stationed in Memphis at Millington Naval Base, and that's where I got discharged there. and I was a sergeant of guard over the main gate there at the time when I got released.
And I'm sort of asking this question out of order. I realized I should have asked the follow-up. All that had happened sort of because a lot there had been the sort of Pusan perimeter, the Incheon landing, the Chosan River retreat when the Chinese get in the war. Was there any sense of that when you were in advanced training of what had? Yeah,
they go over that.
They did go over that. You were aware of.
Yeah, we were aware of that, and what they was having dummy rounds that wasn't working, and misfired rifles, ammunition, what have you. So they got made sure we got better equipment and all this when I got over there.
So you were aware of some of the real problems they had, even as a young Marine recruit, very young Marine, that there had been real problems.
Yeah. In fact, I was with a lot of those guys that was right in the middle of that when these round was bouncing off of tanks that would explode and what have you. And they were captured like 2 weeks after the war broke out, and they were like 900 of them that got captured. And I don't know if you've heard about the Tiger Group or not, but they a lot of those guys I was with later on was in that Tiger Group. And the reason why they called it the Tiger Group, I think the officer, the colonel in the North Korean Army that was killed him, just to set an example. He pulled one out of the rank and just shot him, and said, make sure that he'd go have discipline, what have you. And those guys they made their march north, and I don't know how long it took, a couple of months maybe before they made it all the way to Yalu. And I think out of 900, it was 850 some or something. Only 300 survived that came back out of that almost 900. And there were some civilians in that group.
Yeah, I think I met one of the civilians in that march.
Oh, is that right?
Oh yeah, no, he once took a nap. I was meeting him in a lounge, and I think he started taking a nap, and I could tell he was having he had pretty horrible dreams at night just from watching him during this nap.
Yeah, they had missionaries. And,
he in fact
was he a missionary?
Yeah, and I can't. He'd written a memoir, and I wish I could remember. He was a pastor, Methodist. He was a Methodist pastor. I know he was a pastor, and he had gone to my undergraduate. He had gone to the theological school that I went to as an undergraduate, Drew, and he'd gone to the seminary there.
Well, in that Tiger Group, it was I don't know if he told you this story. There's a guy named Johnny Johnson, and they came out in the Reader's Digest article about him. And what he did, every time somebody would die, he would write it down and where they were from and the rank and the whole bit. And so he kept this list. They called it Johnny Johnson's list. And he kept it up, and they didn't know that he was doing this, and most of them just didn't know that he was doing it. And he got the biggest part of those names of the guys that died, and he had to, and he finally made him 2 copies of it. And therefore, in case, and sure enough, they did find him and punished him for doing that, but he had another copy in the wall in the mud.
Yeah.
And anyway, he got it out there by, usually the North Koreans didn't believe the Geneva Conference. There's no such thing. They was too dumb enough to even know what Geneva Conference meant. But anyway, they didn't let the Red Cross in until, I didn't see them until the day that I was leaving, but they came in 2 or 3 days before we knew it was going to be released. So they gave us this toothpaste, and he emptied the toothpaste and stuck that message down in the toothpaste, and that's how he got it out of there, the name. So he tried to give this to the government, And first they said, we'll get back to you or something. Well, they never did. And this was like years later, maybe 10, 15 years later, you wanted to know where it was MIAs and KIAs and what happened to them. And after they found out, realized that he had that list, well, then he gave it to them. And I was at one of the conventions when the Army came and gave him a silver star in front of everybody for what he'd done.
When did you learn about this list?
Well, I was in POW camp.
So you knew about it in the POW? Yeah.
But mostly, I read the article.
Yeah, you know the full. So you didn't know all the details at the time, but you knew about the list even as a prisoner. After Camp Pendleton, after finishing advanced, when did you get sent to Korea?
I was in they had in drafts, and I was in the 11th draft.
Mm-hmm.
And we went in on a convoy, and there was 3 ships with the police on them. We landed at Pusan, and I remember them sailors who was off. They said, we'd love to be going with you, Marine, but said, how it is with us sailors, we got to stay here and get that warm meal and that warm bed at night. And I didn't think anything about that then, but later on I thought of what he said. And then the sergeant came through and you got all your gear, and he come by and said, you don't need that, and you don't need that, and you don't need that. And you wind up with a lot of, when you go in, you don't want to carry a lot of that stuff with you.
What did he sort of say you don't need? Do you remember any specific?
Well, extra blankets and different kits that you had, and, and a lot of stuff. And you wound up with just your necessities. And so we went out, and of course, you always have a buddy in your sleep haversacks, they call, that you put 2 together to make a tent. And you have to have a buddy. And I remember the first night in Korea, we set up a haversack. We didn't go right in Pusan. I mean, we was on the hillside there, and they teach you to dig a trench around your tent, and they said, it's not going to rain tonight, So buddy came off this rain, and I mean, water was coming between our 2 sacks, where we. And so I learned my first lesson right there.
Who was your buddy?
I forget his name.
Do you remember where he was from?
And I don't even remember where he's from, because I wasn't with him that long.
Yeah.
We got separated.
Yeah.
And that's what I went into.
Now, so I even asked you about getting to, what the immediate experience in Korea. What was the voyage over like? What kind of, you were in a Navy ship.
Yeah.
What type of ship do you remember?
It was the USS Pope, and the USS Black. I forget the name of the other one. But it was just a troop ship. I think it was one of those Liberty ships. I'm not sure you.
Yeah.
It's a Liberty ship. And I think it was 3 of those. And we had good food, and of course the bunks. I think there was 5 high, and I was on the top one, And at nighttime it was warm, and we'd go and sleep on the deck, because they didn't have air conditioning back then in the ships, when you got hot. So.
But the food was okay.
I've never. The food was great.
So you had 3 meals a day.
3 meals a day, and
And you were able to sit at tables in the.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we just go through the line.
Because the reason I ask is because particularly World War II, but even for Korea, the voyage over, voyage home is just a horror story. People just. The ship was dirty. The food was terrible. We were always seasick. You didn't have those.
As far as I was concerned, it was good. And of course, they did get seasick. And I know when we take a shower, it had to be a salt water. And if you ever try to take a bath in the salt water, you can't lather up, but you feel still clean, And it was just beautiful. I mean, the first time we'd been out to sea and what have you, and so we enjoyed it,
One thing about you had said Knoxville was the furthest you had been away from home. Now you didn't get much leave in South Carolina, which is an understatement.
We didn't get any.
Yeah. But what did you get some leave in California?
Oh yeah. Now see, then you're a Marine.
Yeah. So
you're a Marine. Then you're on your own more, and you go to Leverton. Our buddies get together. And we won't live together and this type of thing. So some of the guys from Michigan, and I buddied around with them. And I ran in, and this one buddy of mine I joined with is Charles Farrell from Greenville. Oh, he's from Johnson City, but he moved to Greenville later. And he and I went on Liberty a few times. And he was on the draft before me somehow. He was in the 10th draft. I was 11th going over, But he was in the infantry too. And he stayed in the infantry, by the way. And of course, when I first got over there, after got engineers, I was going through a training process partly too, how to set off explosion, C3 and C4, this type of thing. But also the mine detectors that we had, we'd go and clean areas that needed to make sure they was set up for a CP command post. and they'd call us up, and we'd check all that up before they set in, make sure there's no mines and what have you. And we worked on bridges, and we stayed on the rear for a pretty long time there, for 3 or 4 weeks or so. And then when it was raining, and Sergeant came in, and he says, all right, everybody pack up and be ready to move out in 30 minutes. And I mean, this is taking tents down, and they said, we're going to the front line, we're kicking off. And it sounded like in the Marine Corps, like a football team going into a game. I mean, everybody said, hey, let's go kick hell out of them, let's go get them, you know. And that's what it was. And it raining, and we was packing up and move out. We're going front line, and we're excited. So we set up right next to a 155 howitzer artillery, and we was on one side of the creek, and they was on the other, you know. And I remember when those things would go off at night, you know, it seemed like it'd raise your bunk, you know. But we were in tents and whatnot. And so we were set up there about 7 miles from the front line, roughly. And so, see, when they go out on patrol or whatever, they'd have engineers go with them, with the infantry. So that's when my sergeant, his name was Keith Oliver, and he was sergeant, and he was from Nashville, Tennessee. And he and I would go to the movies at night. And, you know, if you're Tennessee, I mean, you know, you find out where somebody from the South, you get together with them, and then if they're from Tennessee, well, then you might be closer, and for Johnson City, you're even more closer, you know, or whatever. So he was from Nashville, and I got pretty close, you know. So anyway, we went up on the front line. We was working on a bridge to get it back, and they could get across it right on the front lines. The enemy could see us. And of course, to then I didn't know, and I was up cleaning the area, you know, mine detectors and make sure, because we was going to set up over there. And all of a sudden they got and I ran into this friend of mine, Chick Farrell, and he'd just come off of a patrol. And I was watching these Marines come by, and of course it's a small family in the Marine Corps, and you know a lot of them you went through boot camp with and whatever. So here come by Chick, and I said, hey, Chick, you know, and he couldn't stop. I kind of run along with him there talking, you know. And so anyway, we didn't get talk long, but it was about maybe an hour later that the front line got zeroed in, and these rounds coming in, and it landed on, I was on one side of the bridge, and it landed on the other side, and it killed a couple of Marines and wounded 3 or something. And I remember one of the lieutenants that one of them got his leg blown off, and I was putting first aid on him, put a tourniquet on, and I remember he was just white as a sheet, and I asked him, did he smoke? And he said, yeah, and we got the cigarette and gave it to him, and you just see the blood come back in his face, you know, because he was kind of hip to forget, and it's shock, and they keep see, that's part of the training you go through, keep them warm, elevate their feet, this type of thing, different things, first aid. And anyway, this was right after that this Charles Farrell had seen me, and he seen part of that going on, us getting hit. And it was later on, which I'll get into, when I got captured. And so he assumed that that's when I got killed. And he went to...
So that's what that...
He came back to Johnson City and told everybody there, said, I was right there, and I think I seen him get killed. You know, because he didn't know, he was assuming. In fact, this Coach Smallwood I was telling you about gave him some money, and he put some flowers up or something for me. When he got back, you know, and this Coach Smallwood, I remember he said, hey, Chick, said the first thing there, said, I want that $10 back. I gave you some flowers for Delbert's funeral. You know? Yeah, I want that $10 back. Chick. But he came back, and I had a lot of things that happened to me later on that there was one, see it come out in a Leatherneck magazine that I would reported killed in action. Well, a couple of my buddies I was with, maybe in batch training, they got sent other places. And so this one that lived in, and this was like 20 years later, he was coming through Johnson City, and it was Memorial Day, and he said, I think I'll just stop over at the cemetery in Johnson City in respect for Delbert, you know. So we couldn't find the funeral. I mean, the cemetery, gravestone. And so he asked management, and he said, "Hey," he said, "I think I know the story on him." He said, "He's alive, I think, and he's got a brother that lives in town." So he looked up my brother's name, and he called from Johnson City, and he said, "Hey," he said, "Man, I didn't know this." He said, "Hey, I'll be down there." He said, "Tell me where you live." And so he came down, and he took us out. We went out and ate. And so, but when he came in, he says, "You know who this is?" And I said, "Can you remember his first name was Bob?" But he had this picture of he and I taken together while he was in California going through advanced training. So he went back and he lived in New Jersey. And then I got a couple more calls that said, "Hey, we didn't know you was alive." And they called me long distance. This like 10 years later. And then one time I was going through Kroger's. This is while I lived here in Knoxville. And this one guy, he was from Knoxville, I went through boot camp with. And he heard that I had a twin brother. And I was going through with my wife. And I said, "I know that guy." I said, "I think I went to boot camp with him." And he would have to have his arms folded and his sunglasses on. So I just broke ranks and went out. And he says, "You must be Delbert." Says, "I was in the Marine Corps with your twin brother, Delbert. One got killed in Korea." And I says, "No." I says, "This is Delbert." I said, "What, Delbert?" Said, "Golly," he said, "how'd that happen?" Said, and he thought he knew I had a twin, you know. So he and I got together after that too, you know, and he wound up living in Oak Ridge. His name was Jess Thomas. Jess Thomas. But you know, those things happen. And then a couple other instances. When I was in Johnson City, when in somebody that I was in high school with, and they was stationed in Greenland or Europe or someplace, and they never did know any better, and they'd run into me, you know. It was kind of a fun like thing. Yeah. But anyway, this was weeks later that we had this.
So this was weeks later before you were captured.
Yeah.
So he associated. I mean, this was even like a few hours later you were captured. This was completely different.
He thought I was killed when those Marines were killed right on the line there. We was working on a bridge. Yeah. So anyway, maybe it's a couple of weeks later, and this Keith Oliphant, my sergeant, and they had it to where that we was attached to there was the 7th Marines and the 5th Marines, and I think we went out with attached to the 7th Marines on the patrol, and anyway, I volunteered for my sergeant because it was his time to go, and he had a bum foot or something, and I said, "Yeah, I'd be glad to go for you." Well, I volunteered.
I hate to interrupt you, but don't they tell you not to volunteer?
They always tell you that, but I was one of them gung-ho Marines, and I volunteered several other times prior to that, you know. So anyway, I volunteered. So there was only 4 combat engineers. We had the Tetraton, the C3 and C4, and so anyway, we got out on the patrol. What we were going to do was going to blow up. They had 3 bunkers out there, one right and one in the middle, and the enemy had used, and the MLR, which is main line resistant, they thought they had moved out, which they did, but I think they moved back in. So we was going to go blow them up.
Thinking they were not there.
So anyway, we got pretty close, and we started getting rifle, sniper fire. And so I was with the main body there, with the officer, with the radio, and he called back and got his commanding officer and said, "We're receiving sniper fire." I said, "What do you want us to do?" And he said, "Well," said, "just advance on to receive heavy fire." Well, we didn't get no more sniper fire. So they set up, they had one machine gun, and I didn't even have my helmet. I had my gun-ho cap on because I was an engineer, you know, but I did have my rifle, but I was carrying the charges, and I had 2 clips of ammunition. That's all, about my M1. So anyway, they said, "We're going to set up, and you engineers do your job. Go up there and do your job." Yeah. So we got right up, and they seen us coming the whole time. They just waited. And of course, they set in, and they kind of dug in a little bit down there. Patrol, maybe 30 in patrol. So all of a sudden, I mean, we got pretty close to the bunkers. I'd say we was 40 yards from the set up. And then all hell broke loose then. I mean, they had machine guns going, and they're throwing these grenades down. So one of the concussion grenades come down and hit me side the head and hit me in the back some, and it just kind of stunned me. And I didn't know my buddy to the right that it killed him. And I took off, messed his face up. And so I kind of slid back down into it was a mortar round hole, I think. It wasn't a foxhole. And I just kind of covered up, so I got my rifle out. And all I could see, I knew it not to raise up here, but I could see the one firing the bunker. And those bunkers, they build them, but you see where the fire was coming. So I emptied one clip, into the bunker. And then I heard the officer say, withdraw, And so I said, hey, I better get out of here, So what I was doing was putting another clip in, and all of a sudden I heard something behind me, and there was three of them, North Korean. And they just had a burp gun, what they call a burp gun. They just had it on me, and I didn't have a chance, really. So I seen the other Marine that was messed up. And so what happened, I got, prior to that, maybe 3 weeks before that, I got some new combat boots. And one of them hurt me, and I kept an old one on and a new one. And evidently he did the same thing. And so when they finally got his body, they identified him as me and him as Messi. And so that's how I got reported killed in action. And of course, I didn't know about that. So when they got me, they, of course, immediately tied my hands with wire behind me and they took me back maybe another couple hundred yards or so on the bunker. And so I didn't know what happened to the rest of them. It was hit or never did know until, of course, I talked to Keith Oliphant when I got back, because he said he came back to visit my mother from Nashville when he got out, and got all the way to Johnson City and said, nah, this wouldn't be a good thing to do, to tell his mother about anything. So he just drove back and said, and anyway, it was 5 months later that I was with POW.
How did they find that out? How did they switch?
Well, the negotiation was going on, Panama John, between North and South. So anyway, we started making this march. I was by myself for the first 3 days, I guess. And I had my hands tied the whole time behind me. And then it dawned on me about seeing these pictures of these GIs with their hands tied behind them and chopping back the head and all this. And then it dawned on me that, some of those things could happen. So and then when I got back and they interrogated me, the officer, I just told him, I said, hey, I'm a peon. I don't know anything. They want to know about when we landed in Japan, because we had landed in Japan first. And we was there 2 or 3 days before we went to quit. We was in Kobe, Japan.
Mm-hmm.
And he was wanting to know how many ships. And I said, listen, I'm a peon. I don't know any of that. I just gave my name, rank, and cell number, and shot the, you'd lie. You'd say, oh, they might have been 100 ships or something, just nothing that wouldn't throw them off. It would give them anything. And I was telling the truth. I didn't know a lot about anything. So I kind of convinced them that I was just a peon, But anyway, and then later I ran into one other Marine named Ed Jones, and then I ran into 4 Army guys. There's a Mexican named Garza, and then there was a boy from Nebraska named Lloyd Dolan, and then there was a Billy Joe Buchanan Army, and then there was a Ray Unger from Chicago. And this Billy Joe Buchanan had half of his arm, and you just see the bone partly in there, and he was having some difficulty. And so anyway, they took us. We was together maybe a week or something. And we was marching, and they took us to this place called Kangdong. It was about 8 or 10 miles from Pyongyang, capital of North Korea. And this was we called it the mining camp, I think. And it was an old Japanese mine, and we was in the Japanese barracks, I think. And this is where we had our worst treatment. And of course, these pilots come in. There was, I think, a few might have been there, but most of them come in later. And I was with about 35 pilots. And we were getting some food that you probably never heard of. It was called sorghum. It's comes off of cane tassel and millet. And we was feeding us in a rusted barrel that was cut off in half. And that was it. And we just, you couldn't eat that sorghum hardly. I mean, you'd have to gag and just force it down, you know, and that's when those pilots just kind of gave up. And I was with, maybe I think it was about 4 or 5, there's 5 Marine Corps pilots there. There was a Captain Amon, Captain Jerry Fink. There was a Lieutenant Wagner. And I can't remember his name, but I know there was a Major Harrison that he was in the Air Force that got shot down, and when he fell down, it clipped his leg, and his leg was, he told me later about it, was dangling, and of course when he hit the ground, he had to amputate. So he's the one that made a march north too, but we was there maybe, and I've got it in this book here that tells a little bit about the trip that we made and some of the officers and what have you. And like I say, there's about 50 of us in all that was making a trip north. And this was it came down there for on that November, first weeks of November.
And you were under the North Koreans.
Yeah, well, yeah. This whole time we were under North Koreans. Yeah.
And actually we have a
Yeah, we went from Wonsan here. We went up to here. We just barely missed Wonsan because I remember those big ships, those big old 16-inch shells were going over. You could hear them swishing through the air. And then we went cut back over here to, Pack's place. And but then there's I don't have that. King Dong was about right in here, but they left the Pack's place on to King Dong. So a lot of them officers was out there at the Pack's place. Yeah.
And then where did you head up when you headed north?
And then we went and headed all the way north, all the way up to Changsong Camp 3. Changsong, here's you can have this if you want. This is let's see. Changsong's right here. Camp 1 and 3. This Camp 3 and Camp 1 is right here. And that's Camp 2 and Camp 4. And I think the Pack's place was out down here. But we were on the other side there, a place called King Dong. And anyway, that was where they were. A few officers died before we ever left, and that was the one where I was telling you about Lieutenant Dawson. And but then it was survival, and he was in a coma. He just barely held it, and we was leaving the next morning. That next morning, I felt his heart, and he was just barely. And anyway, he had some guys knew that he was going to die, and took his shoes and socks and different things, so you knew he was going to need them later on, So then we started our march north. This was about the first part of November, and that means getting cold. And so when we first started our march, we went across this bridge, and this one, his name was Hines. He was a lieutenant colonel. Captain. And he was too sick almost to make the trip, really. So they was going to throw him off of the Koreans. Well, they were mean. They would kick you. I know we was marching there one time, and I went and broke ranks to go over and get an apple core where somebody threw off, because we was getting 2 balls of cracked corn twice a day.
During the march.
Once in the morning, once at night. And I remember this boy from Texas, 6'4", he just crammed the whole thing in his mouth at one time. He didn't, and he was that small. And we carried the ration with us, and I was one of the strong ones. I had to help carry as we were going, you know, and they had a ox cart. And I know this Charles Elder, he was from Baltimore, Maryland. He had his half of his rear end shot off, and he had a bad problem. So they had about 5 or 6 of the guys that was on that ox cart, 6, I believe, on the ox cart. So anyway, that Lieutenant Hines, they were going to throw him off of that bridge. Said, hey, he's too sick, he's going to die anyway. So I think it's Lieutenant Wagner is the one that kind of talked them into not doing it, and then the guys, and so anyway, he died the next day, I think. He died the next day. So we was on that trip about 2 weeks, maybe 14 days, and it was estimated 225 miles that we walked. I don't know how much, I didn't never figure a day, but we walked, you know, a day. And I remember one time the American planes had spotted, and we thought they'd spot this, and this road was kind of high elevation, and these planes come peeling off, you know, at us, and boy, we hit the deck, and see, most of those guys are pilots, and I kind of looked back and went and grabbed my head and slammed it down and said, that's just like a mirror when you're looking back with your face. So keep your head down and just hope the best. But when I looked up, I seen them release one of them 500-pound bombs, and I'm just waiting for it to hit. But it went right over our head, and they didn't see us, and it was hitting a railroad track that was parallel to the road. And boy, I mean, it knocked 50, 60-foot craters in that railroad, you know. So then we had to go through this town, the next, and all these civilians, all they spit at us, threw rocks at us, everything else, because we just had bombed, you know, the railroad track and what have you. And I know we did have a black guy with us. He was Army. And we had one guy that was about 6 foot, God, he was 6'4", and I think he was a Ranger, Army Ranger. But he was built about 50 inches out chest, small waist. And we'd go into town, and they would put him on a pedestal, like just to look, because most of us North Koreans had never seen a black before. And then anybody that size, him big, and they'd go, yeah, you know, and then talk, you know. And we'd sleep into a half of a house that was blown out or something, you know, and we'd wake up, and those Korean kids would be there jabbering, you know, and they'd grab a hold of the hair on your arm, because see, most of them didn't have hair, you know, and they'd wake you up by going, yeah, you know, I go. And anyway, later on, run into some Russians that they was staying at this place. They came out in bathrobes and stood and looked at us and what have you. And we run into Russians a few times. And later on, we seen some of the dog fights that went on at pilots and what have you. But we came to this. It was about 2 or 3 days before we made it on into the camp, and had this Changsong River that we had, and there was ice on the edge, and I think something floating in the river. It was that cold. This is back about Thanksgiving, 25th or 6th or something of 50.
Because you were captured in September
the 7th,
1951, and so
September the 7th,
and this was November of 51,
and we'd starting in losing weight and this type of thing. And the guys had malnutrition, very about name we had, you know, very lacking malnutrition. And anyway, we debated on how to do, because the bridge was knocked out, how to get across that river. So they built a fire over there and hesitated for an hour or so. And all of a sudden it said, pull your clothes off, we're going across. And so we pulled our clothes off and walked across that cold. And I had to go back another trip to help carry one of the wounded. And I know we had I think it was 2 Australians with us, and one from a Turk. And one of the Australians, from exposure, just died might have been the same day. And I think it was 2 died from just exposure at that time. And then on that the ox cart, I think there's only one survivor, was that Charles Elder. The rest of them died. I think it's 7, 8 on it that died before we made it to camp. And then when we're still in the Koreans, and I mean, we got kicked and jabbed and this type of thing the whole trip, you know. And so anyway, we got turned over to Chinese, and the Chinese did have a lenient policy. And all of a sudden, going from that cracked corn and that sorghum that we ate, guys had lost down a lot of weight. And anyway, we started getting turnips twice a day. And buddy, I mean, we thought we was living then, turnips twice a day, you know. I mean, it was different, but we got twice a day. And of course, you couldn't gain much weight from turnips, you know. But of course, the guys did start getting in better shape. And this went on for about a year or so, about a year. And then they started feeding us a little bit better and started giving us some steamed bread. They steamed their bread. and we would occasionally get some potatoes. And rice was still a luxury. Very seldom got rice. And they did feed, maybe get a ham or something, and out of 200 or 300 men cut it up and with some type of potato soup or something, you'd get, but that was very odd. It wasn't, that was seldom, you know. But the Chinese went in, they had the lenient policy, but it was the first time that any war that they tried to brainwash the GIs.
Mm-hmm.
And so we went into that brainwash. They would, maybe once a week, they would get us as a general and go over this stuff, propaganda. That's all it was, propaganda about communism better. Then the United States started a war, it wasn't them. It was all lies, you know. And so they would put us into groups. They would, after we go through the general meeting, they'd get us into groups, and they'd put a squad leader over each group. And then you have to talk politics or this type of thing, and then that squad leader would have to report. So all of the guys that cooperated, we called them progressors. And those that didn't was reactionaries. And they would, I'll guarantee you, most of them were reactionaries. I mean, but they did try to treat you better if you cooperated, you know. So those guys that did cooperate, then they started giving them better food, better treatment, what have you, and they separated them because it wasn't, if we would catch them out, somebody would beat them up, you know, if they kept going to a train or something. So they kept them more isolated, and in their camp, they, out of the 21 prisoners that had stayed over there, they were 5 in our camp, but they were isolated way before, you know.
Before you even got there?
No, they in the camp while I was already in the camp.
Yeah, I mean, when you arrived at the camp, they had already been.
No.
They were part of the march.
They were part of the march.
Yeah.
Some of them, no, 1 or 2 of them might have been in the march, but some of them was already.
They were already in the camp.
In the camp.
Was it ever tempting to sort of go over and become a progressive?
Well,
I mean, because you know, even just
got better treatment. But,
yeah.
But most of the guys didn't. And now, see, they make up this lie, a letter, and have you like you're getting steak and this type of thing, and you're getting 3 meals a day, and they would want you to sign it, and this would go to the United Nations.
Mm-hmm.
And go back to America. And they had the Daily Worker, which is a New York communist magazine that we would get, and we would read this stuff, you know. And I know Paul Robeson, you've heard of him.
Yes.
He was he wrote big articles in there and what have you, that Daily Worker. But we would get all that Daily Worker and read it. And they would and they went over capitalism versus communism. And in the United States, we were all capitalists, all big business. And there was no middle class. It was all the rich and just the poor. And see, all this stuff, we knew better. And see, we didn't. But anyway, out of the 5, I think it was one of them was named John Dunn. He was from Baltimore. And I think he had a couple years of college. And then there was a Rush, a Webb from Florida, and Benares from California, and Belahomie. Now this Veneris, he was a Greek, and he's the only one that's still in China. And this Belahome, he was from Belgium. His parents was before they moved over here. He went back to Belgium, I think. And this Dunn, as I was telling you about, he was a girl over in China, and he lives in Czechoslovakia today.
Mm-hmm.
And but out of the 21, there's only one that's still over there. He married and had about 6 children with Chinese, so he's the only one still over there. The rest of them came back.
Yeah.
Some of them immediately.
Did it surprise you that some?
Oh yeah,
you
it surprised you. And I heard in some report that some of them that stayed would come from broken homes. Well, I came from a broken home. I didn't
yeah.
have a father, and all that stuff didn't. To me, I was, and I know a few times I had to say stand out in the cold for. I remember one time 8 or 10 hours because I wouldn't sign one of those forms because I knew it was a lie. You'd just be signing a lie.
So what kind of stuff did they put in these things that they wanted you to sign?
The letter stated that you was getting treated decently, getting 3 meals a day, steaks and all this stuff, and it was all nice, the way we was treated and all. But some of them did do that, and some of the reactionaries, it kind of went over at first. It didn't take them long to come back to the reactionary side, after they realized. But the brainwashing, they tried everybody, and some of it soaked in, and they gave you about capitalism, and they're talking about the Rockefellers and the Vanderbilts and the Fords, and
Actually, hold. Yeah.
And communism, everybody is there's no poor.
Mm-hmm.
And everything's run by the state, and everybody's got the same amount of everything and all this, and they try to give you the good parts of that and the bad parts of capitalism and all this. But of course, they didn't go state declared. They didn't have freedom of speech and freedom of newspapers and freedom of religion and all this, they didn't go into detail. But the communist, to be a communist, you have to be an atheist. And I remember one of the Daily Workers came out that had a picture of Jesus Christ and they had wanted dead alive or something, boy, that just turned you against, how some of those guys went along with that, you just don't know.
I'm curious, I don't know how to put this. Was there anything they were telling you that was new, even if you didn't believe it? I mean,
we would get stuff 3 months behind the schedule.
Yeah.
And we had the POW camp marked to where the planes would come over and they'd get in dogfights and we'd see them. And I remember one time those 2 got shot down and they tried to tell us it was Americans, and it wasn't 30 minutes later, here come 2 Russian pilots through our camp, through the edge of the it was the Russians that got shot down, because I think our ratio was something like 15-1 that we shot down their planes, the ones we lost, because we ruled the skies.
Yeah.
And anyway, if we would go a couple of weeks without hearing any planes, they'd say, hey, the war's over, And those people, bacteriological warfare, I remember they would drop this aluminum foil, and because it shred against throw radar off and what have you. And anyway, they got this aluminum foil and thought it was germ warfare or something, and trying to burn it, and it wouldn't burn, And
see, that was in your camp that had happened.
That happened, yeah.
Because I've also read that some of you guys started playing with it, and were you part of that group that played with it, or is that with the aluminum foil?
They was one of the guys. He was a black guy. And they were, when we got down into them, both had some ants or something, and they made us get in a circle and wanted us to see, you know, this backdrop of which they had masks on and all this, the Chinese did. And so the black boy, his name's Pixley, I think he's from Arkansas. Anyway, he just went over and grabbed one of them ants, which was just normal for something to be crawling over the tinfoil, and he just grabbed one and ate it. Boy, they got him, and they gave him a shot, and they got him out, and we never did see him again. I mean, I don't know where they took him or what, but they found out that they thought that was planes were dropping backdrops of warfare. And, yeah, they.
When you were having this sort of brainwashing, I mean, what would you say back? I mean, did you often just try to be silent, or, you know, what could you say?
You couldn't argue much in the sense you could kind of sometimes give your viewpoint, but not argue because you would make them mad, and they were 100%. They were right, and they were going this lenient policy by, and I will say that they're lenient policy because the Koreans beat us up. So
I mean, I've told that in fact the Chinese, by comparison,
and Chinese in comparison, they did have a lenient policy, and they put you in solitary confinement, and when you get wrong, this type of thing, you feed you bread or say bread and water, it wasn't even that good, you know. But that's about the limit as far as.
So it was really solitary at this point. Whereas before with the North Koreans, it was random executions.
Oh yeah. Yeah, they North Korea was just very, very humane. Very humane. They were kicking you and hitting you and slapping you and, you know, this type of thing. And then, of course, they shot some of them just, if you was on a march and like on that Tiger group, if you fell behind, they shot them. They just shot them.
Now, how much, I'm curious because you said they told you very little about being a prisoner. Had you known of sort of, you know, some of these mass executions that had occurred to prisoners? Had you known about it before you became a prisoner?
Yeah, it would have had a bearing on me, I'm sure.
But you didn't know about
I didn't know about it.
So you learned it when you were a prisoner.
Right. But now they teach that now.
Yeah.
After the Korean War, they do that.
Yeah. But you didn't even.
No. All they did was just, hey, you give your name, rank, and serial number. Of course, we knew that. And that's what most of the guys, the peons, did. But now let me tell you this. The officers, they did take some of the higher officers that they knew, and they would want to know about a bomber or a plane. And they took some of them into Russia, and they never came back.
Yeah.
And they still don't know what happened to those people. They took some into China. And I think some of them from China did come back. But they did take some into China, but those that went to Russia never did come back. So,
No, I've read that that's still an outstanding.
yeah. And they still looking over archives and what have you, trying to trace that back, and still don't know nothing.
In a weird way, you got to know the enemy much better than than you would in. I mean, it's a weird thing, but once you were a prisoner, I mean, in a sense, what did you think of the enemy? I mean, obviously, it's a very.
We had to go on work details, and it was mostly we would go unload barges and this type of thing after the guys got in good shape. But I mean, that first winter, the winter of '50, and those guys were captured in the Tiger Group. They're the one that really had it hard because so many of them died, and it was so cold. And they said they would bury them, and they couldn't get them all buried. And sometimes they had an arm sticking out, or a leg or something later on, and they just couldn't bury them fast enough. They died so fast. But we did have it a little more. We was getting turnips and stuff, and we were warm. And they over there, they have what they call them combs. They heat the floor. They build a fire on one side,
Mm-hmm.
and this mud's just thick, and that smoke and heat goes all the way through and comes out the other
So you were
side,
pretty.
and it heats it up.
So you were pretty warm during the winter once you were in the permanent camp.
Yeah. It was pretty cold, but we stayed. They gave us those cotton pads,
Mm-hmm.
and we stayed. We wore the same type they did, only a different color, because it was just cotton with laps of cloth on both sides, and you had your hat and your jacket and your pants, cotton pants.
you probably had a watch on when you were captured.
I had a watch and ring. And I had my high school ring on.
And that got, when did that get taken?
The sergeant, I think he was, he took it off and said, okay. And he wanted me to say okay to even hand it, you know. And I said, no. Well, he took it anyway. He didn't have no choice. But now I did, at one time, this was on a trip. There were the 6 of us, you know, before we got back to the main group. And you always think about escaping and what have you. And I thought I would just try it in the sense that just to see away with it. And we was in this farmhouse and they had this guard going around, you know. And so I was kind of timing him on his shadow because they had these paper over the doors, you know, top doors. And so I kind of timed it to when he went around. So what I did, I said, well, I'm just going to say I'm going to the bathroom. So I eased it apart, you know, and we had a couple Korean soldiers inside, but they were asleep. And so I'm just going to say I'm going to the bathroom. So I eased it open and closed it. Sure enough, I missed him. So I went, and they had their cornfields closed, you know. So I just hurried over to the cornfield, and sure enough, he went around, and I said, oh man, I'll just go another, so I wouldn't make no noise, another. So I bet it wasn't, it was an hour or less. they carried the cup, and they got me to the same place. But a Korean stuck a gun beside me. He says, you leave again, open soap. In other words, they're just going to shoot me. And by being a Korean, I believed it. So you didn't have much chance to escape because where would you go? You got the coast on both sides, and you can't go into China, so you'd have to go back to. And the Chinese, it was just alive in Chinese. I mean, you could just see mountains up there. You know?
But that was the one chance you saw that you described. That was the only.
That was the only chance. And later on, we got the camp. There was 3 guys that were saving some of the, when we got getting better food, getting that steamed bread, they saved some up. And I think there were 3 of them and escaped. The guy, he's gone. He might be gone 2 days because you had the machine gun set up on that side. But we lived in a village. It wasn't no fence. It was just a village, and had to surround it. So anyway, they worked it to where they got out, and I think he was gone 2 days. They brought him back to the same place. They told him the same thing. So there was really no place to go. If you escape.
My understanding of, and correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding of the Korean Americans in the POW camp in Korea, in World War II, even under the Japanese, there's still the American structure. There's sort of a ranking officer or a ranking NCO who is in a sense interacts with the guards and with the enemy. Whereas here, that had been broken down by the Chinese. Am I depicting that?
Yeah, usually you didn't. They didn't wear insignias on their uniform. And I don't know how they felt. The officers were different, but of course they had the guards, was the peons, and of course they had I think 3 interpreters there. That 2 of them were named Sue, and they one of them they both spoke good English.
Yeah, but in other words, the Chinese had really disrupted the chain of command in the camp.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in other words.
Oh, they see what they did.
Yeah.
We was with officers and all this, and so they separated the officers.
Yeah.
They went to Camp 5, I believe, and the sergeants they separated, and then from corporals on down, they kept together.
But you had no ranking NCO in your camp who represented the camp. You were.
No.
And you had a sergeant. So in a sense, how much military discipline were you able to keep while you were in camp? And sort of.
We had, when they had the officers along, we did have some. And the old saying, I know in the Marine Corps, you respect that officer, I don't care where it is.
Mm-hmm.
So we respect the officers, and they told us something or something, we did it.
Mm-hmm.
We helped them out quite a bit. And like I say, some of them, out of those 35 officers, I think out of those that died, about 7 or most of them were officers.
Yeah.
And some of them just couldn't cope as well as NCOs good. But they was Air Force, Marine, and they was some British Marine that got captured. There was 2 or 3 of them, I think, and one Turk, a couple Australians.
So where your permanent camp that you end up in, was it just Americans, or were there some of these other allies?
Just Americans.
Just Americans. You were also separated out that way. How many fellow Marines were with you?
When I got there in our camp, there were 3 other Marines. I was the 4th. That was it's Ed Jones. Well, the one with me is Ed Jones, and then there's Lessman, and then Badoff, I think is his name. There were 4 Marines. Is all, and those Army personnel, it was all in fun. You know, they give us a rough time, call us jarheads and this type of thing, but it's all fun. You know, but we was all together in one unit, big buddies.
Now, you were something of a prankster in high school and growing up. Were you able to do any pranks in the Chinese camp?
Yeah, this one boy from Memphis, his name was Buford McNamara, and we got this snake that we got, and the main Chinese headquarters was right in, of course it was the head guards out there, you know, but we made sure that the guards couldn't see or you know what. So we got this snake and we took it down there and we threw that thing right in headquarters. And they got mad and they got everybody out, and they chewed us because they couldn't find out who it was. Martin could tell. And that's another thing that the guy was pretty strict about. They got consulted, wouldn't tell on another fellow man. They knew it was going to hurt him, you know. But those progressives did. They did, and that's why that some of them got beat up later on for telling for different things. But that was the one aspect, and then another one was sometimes the guards, Chinese guards, they'd throw snowballs at this type of thing, and they'd say tamale P, which is an SOB in Chinese, you know, and they didn't know where it would come from and this type of thing. You know.
Was there any trading that was possible? Did you have anything to trade with guards? I mean, that's common in a number of POW camps. But did you have?
No, they wasn't. But the one thing that I did know that you might not have heard before is that marijuana grows wild.
Yeah.
Down there partly, and we go, and I didn't know what it was, and I was one of those that, like my brother, I never did smoke or drink when I went in, and didn't up until that time. When I got out, I started drinking beer a little bit, you know.
Yeah.
Part of it, but the guys go out and get that marijuana and bring it back, and then they got so that they were trading stuff to the Koreans, because the Koreans would walk them right through our camp, you know, the North Korean civilians.
Yeah.
And some of them got trading with them on the marijuana part.
So they would trade the marijuana for food or for
for different but now they wasn't, I don't know, out of percentage wise, maybe 5%. So there wasn't many that did that.
Did that trade?
Did. I mean, they smoked the marijuana this time of day.
So about 5% smoked.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you never tried
No,
it.
I never tried it. No, I didn't. I was just my morals, values.
Yeah.
I just never did.
Well, you also, it's like your brother, you never took up smoking.
Right. I
in
never
this.
smoking or drinking. I sure did. In fact, my ration, you got so many a month.
Yeah.
And I'd swap mine for Coca-Colas or Pepsi or something, you know, for other guys, because they didn't have the beer, you know. And I didn't smoke, so. But I did pick it up a little bit when I came back, and when I started, went back to state and what have you. And do you want to go on there?
Well, I wanted to ask you a few more questions. I want to go back to sort of coming to Korea, way back to coming to Korea. And actually, I want to, since you landed in Japan, what did you think of all these places you were going to? You had not been outside of Knoxville, had been the big city,
I
so
was one of them that was exposed there.
What struck you about California, Japan, Korea before you got captured?
It was just everything big. But now they did warn us about marijuana going out to California. They did the Marine.
The Marines warned you already at
They
that.
sure did. From Paris Island when we went out there, says, and it was salesmen on corners and this type of thing. They said avoid them, and they didn't want to get that started because you're a college. I mean, you're out of the Marine Corps. You just put up that stuff, drugs and stuff. So they did tell us about that, and we knew better too to be exposed to that part. But I was just didn't know anything about anything, and of course we went to Tijuana, and then when we got in Japan, we was out 3 days, and we went out and ate and had liberty and this type of thing, and the girls would come up sometimes and say, "You want girlfriend?" and this type of thing. That was just automatic. That's just part of being in. And this was post-war Japan. This was about 5 years after the Second World War was over.
I mean, you had followed the war in Japan, and then you had your brother. I mean, it was not a distant war in the sense that you knew someone who.
Yeah, I was familiar with that.
What did you think of being in Japan? I mean,
it was different, and everything was so compact. And these rickshaws, and of course we had to ride one of them rickshaws, and paid one to ride us, and we went out and ate. We ordered a steak, but golly, over there was nothing compared to here. You got a little bit of, but anyway, it was still steak, and we got peas, potatoes, or something, But it was a liberty, and it was an experience. And before we went to Korea.
When you landed in Korea, you were actually in the rear for a while.
I was in the rear. Yeah, we worked on bridges and clearing areas
for
mine detectors and clearing there because there's a lot of steel. I remember one time it was a 500-pound bomb that didn't go off, and we had to when we'd find something, of course, we'd set it up and get down over a hill and set it off, to blow something up. But that's one case. The officer says, "Hey," says, "you just leave that alone." You leave that alone. And we took pictures sitting on top of it, it was a 500-pound bomb. And it was a dud, but still, everybody just said, "Hey, just leave that alone for the time being, maybe later."
When you mentioned you were supposed to go into infantry.
Wow.
When do you actually get separated to go into the engineers? Because you said it was in Korea.
Oh, yeah. As soon as I got to, we was in Tucson for 2 or 3 days.
And then
when we got on the plane, we went, it was before we got to Engie, is where we, and see Engie, up there's where I got captured. It was a punch bowl. I don't know if you're familiar with the punch bowl, and we called it punch bowl. And the Marines had Operation Killer going on, and they was pushing, and I think we had something like 183 Marines killed in that when they pushed off, and it was pretty big combat.
So you were in Busan, and then the training and the mine clearing activity that took place further north. Yeah. And the unit you're put in, what do you remember about the people you served with and your NCOs and your officers?
I remember we like a Sergeant Hoffman, he and I got close friends, and he was working on the bridge there
When
the South Korean, and anyway, this is the first time that I seen got some association with some of the South Koreans. We had 2 or 3 working with us, and in our outfit. In fact, they go through the chow line with us, and they wasn't familiar with. They would get this like jelly, and they just fill up the whole plate with jelly because they wasn't used to getting sweets, and they'd get half a canteen of sugar and pour milk over it and just eat plain. And they'd get sick because it too much sweet, milk over sugar, and then eat it. And I remember the first time we was working on a bridge there one time, and I noticed underneath Papa's son, Mom's son, they had this dog tied and had a big kettle going, and that dog, as we was working on the bridge and what have you, pretty soon we seen that Papa's son there grab a hammer and hit that dog in the head and killed it, and they eat that dog and we cleaned it and the family right there, the dog. And of course, later on found out it was very, but they don't do that anymore.
Yeah. I mean, you would come.
Eat the dog, and that was very, to me, I couldn't believe it. And then those little Korean boys would come up. Of course, we'd get her sea ration and throw them chocolate and what have you. But I noticed when I first got over there, I was number one in the Marine, you know.
They do with their thumb, number one.
Yeah. And they had their pockets full of something. They'd pulling it out and eating it, you know, pulling it off and eating it. And I looked, and what it was roasted grasshoppers. And they were pulling the wings off and eating grasshoppers, roasted. And had their pockets full with it, you know. And I thought that was a little gross, you know. But of course, it's survival, you know. And the Korea was very poor at that time because the highways all was rock. And now they got paved highways and all this and big buildings, but then they didn't have any highway was not paved. And mud huts and.
When because you had not grown up in a very particularly in the 30s, you wouldn't say your life was very comfortable. But how did you, having seen Korea, how did you think about the world? What did you think of the world you had lived in, and versus now what you saw in Korea?
It was different. The language but the Koreans that did speak English, like some of them that don't speak English, I thought were very well behaved, and they liked Americans. They did like Americans. All South Koreans, they liked Americans.
So you got a sense that you were really appreciated.
Yeah. I got a sense that we were really appreciated. Yeah. They treated us properly, and it was just opposite of the North Koreans. You know, they hated all Americans and all that propaganda they gave us that the Americans started the war and all these lies and just common sense to know better, you know.
I'm curious. You had a very vivid story earlier about the shelling, with the rumors of your death, which emerged out of that, and putting a tourniquet on someone who had his leg blown off. Is that the most, until you actually got captured? That, which is also pretty vivid. Was that the closest call? Was that the most sort of that you were?
That was my first combat experience, but I remember as we was making on that march, we had to cross a river, and we didn't have to. It wasn't. Yeah. The river that was on the patrol. I was still a Marine, and we just went through that just like one there, and we seen some of these dead North Koreans laying around where their chest had blown out and what have you, and where the artillery had hit and timber laying everywhere. And of course, we just left, and you know, we went on, and we were on a patrol. But later on, we seen quite a few enemy dead that they hadn't taken their bodies away. I mean, like one time, the whole hill covered dead bodies. They hadn't had time to clear it out, I guess, one side or the other.
Did you have any other before you get captured, close calls in terms of enemy fire?
The only time was when we was working on that bridge, and they got it. And I remember this Jeep coming, and when he said, "Let's get the hell out of here." So they got this place zeroed in, and around landed right beside of him, and he came out of all the smoke, and so after I realized they turned the motor off, and we had these tractors, road scrapers going, whatever, and we turned them off, and then you could hear the rounds coming in, and I went and dived another one of them Caterpillar tractors, you know, and they were just going everywhere, but that's when we found out that it landed on the other side and killed a couple of Marines and wounded 3, I believe. And that's when that chick made that statement that he assumed that I got killed. But the other Marine, and I still forget his name, he was they got killed, but they say his teeth plate was identical to mine too. His face was messed up, you know. So that's why that they thought. In fact, my mother knew one of my buddies I played high school football with. He was a doctor, and he was stationed in the Army, and she wrote him a letter to see if she could find my grave. I was killed. Where was my body? You know. And so anyway, she didn't get much results there. But she just such a strong religious belief that she just never did accept that I was, even though she got all those.
You even got the insurance money. I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, it's,
Yeah, we get the insurance money and the whole bit. And of course, she paid off the house, and she didn't have to pay that back. Yeah, we was lucky there. And when I came back, we was a little bit better off.
you mentioned religion was very important to you growing up.
It was.
What about in the Marines and then being a prisoner? What do you remember about?
Well, later on, believe it or not, even though communist was atheist, we had this one guy called Pop Cunningham. We were 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds, and he was like 39 years old. And he talked them into having some type of religious service while in camp. And this was maybe after the first year. And they thought about it. He went back there 2 or 3 times. They thought about it. Finally, they did let us. And he held some type of service that we would go to on Sunday. And his name was Pop Cunningham. And of course, he passed away some time ago, I'm sure.
What did you have access to any portion of the Bible when you were a prisoner? No. You had no.
None whatsoever.
None. What did you have to read? Because you mentioned the Daily Worker.
They had the Daily Worker. They did have a library later on. Like I say, the first year it was just a Bible.
Yeah.
But they did have a library later on, and it was communist magazines that was in English, and there's a lot of Russian, you know, because Russia was taking North Korea and then China was allies, and we had the Daily Worker, and we would get news like if the Olympics was over, and it might be 2 months before we found out who won. You know, they would give us a story that Russians won. You know, and after we found out that it was a tie or Americans had won. You know, so their propaganda was so you couldn't believe anything. And why some of those guys, well, they got better treatment. I guess that's the reason why they got better food, why they went that route.
I get this. I think this is a harder image from particularly. I mean, from many of my students, the Cold War is ancient history. You know, I think they have no grasp of this. But in your era, there's a real, there are real true believers in communism. Did you get the sense that particularly your guards were true believers in this? That they really believe this, or do you think they just happened to be here?
They had such a control. The communists had such a control that their soldiers and all didn't have no other way to go.
Mm-hmm.
They might would set it underneath to their buddy or something, but they were under. They had people undercover and report on them and this type of thing. So it was a closed society that they were scared of each other because they knew not who to talk to and this type of thing. So it was this belief to themselves on the true meanings of capitalism. They wasn't getting the truth, in other words.
So in other words, you really got the sense that they believe this stuff. It's not just that they're cynically going along with it, that they really truly,
Well, I think in Iron Curtain, I think some of those countries, a lot of them did believe.
Yeah.
They believed otherwise, but they were afraid because, like Stalin, he killed 4 or 5 million of his own people, and a lot of them is just a matter of neighbor reporting on another neighbor, and that was it. So scared, and they didn't, they did believe all the propaganda that they didn't believe the Americans was living as well as they did.
So it sounds like you occasionally tried to tell them differently, and
we would, we would try to tell them, and they wouldn't believe it. Said we had a TV and a phone or whatever. They didn't believe that.
Yeah.
They just couldn't believe that. Because it was just communism versus capitalism, and you seen there's only 3 communist countries in the world now: Cuba and China. Partly they're more socialist, but more we're getting democracy more so now, and North Korea is the only communist country that I know of.
You've been able to talk a lot about your pre-OW experiences. Were you always able to sort of talk about them like you've done today?
I feel pretty. Sometimes I get a little tense when talking about my mother, and you know what she went through.
I mean, it sounds like that must have when you were in the camp. Is that something you thought about a lot? Your mother, what your family was
Going through.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because were you ever able to write her when you were in the camp?
Yeah. After 5 months, and see, the Pan with John negotiation was going on, and then they agreed to exchange POW names. So she got word on the radio. Somebody called and said, "Have you heard there was POW in North Korea?" And of course, they all thanked him and enjoyed and this type of thing. And we did start getting letters, and of course, we could write letters out, but we had to put on there. Let me see, North Democratic Republic against American aggression or something like that. We had to put it on there in order to let it get through.
Yeah.
Did they
Yes,
read your
American.
letters when you were able
Oh,
to
yeah.
write them?
Yeah, they
checked
wrote.
them?
They checked them when we wrote them, and they checked them when we received them. Yeah. And you didn't get them if it was something they didn't think. You didn't get them.
So you were able to get some letters from.
Yeah, I got some. We did exchange letters and whatever. Yeah, we sure did.
How much did you tell to your mother when you got home?
Well, I just told her that it was through God that I got back, and I had faith. And the old Marine part come out in me when the discipline part, and it helped. It really did. And the rough times, and I guess the rough times being raised too kind of helped too. Because like I say, when I went to the Marine Corps, I found a home as far as the food and all this, which a lot of them didn't believe at the same time.
You had mentioned that you in a sense tried to really keep your spirits up during this.
A lot of the guys had actually just just give up, and I would talk to them in terms of, hey, we're gonna get out of here. And I would try to build their hopes up, and it worked in a lot. And that's what you have to have. You just have to think positive, Because see, at one time, I'd say most of the guys was 100 pounds or less, and I got down to about 120 pounds, and they thought I had berry, because when you get berry, you kind of swell up and you indent and it slowly come back out. And they said, "Golly, you legs, you got berry now." But I just kind of helped take care of myself a little.
How much did you when you were captured? How much did you weigh roughly?
I weighed about 188.
So you lost about 60. You lost over slightly.
And when I got released, you see that picture there.
Yeah, I mean, in the picture you look great. I mean,
I weighed about 150. I guess 155, even then.
How did they? I mean, how did?
And the first meal they gave us when we got back, they says, you think that they just say, "Hey, eat all you want," but they says, "Hey, you got this meal, and that's all you can have." And they gave us a little piece of steak about this, and a little handful of peas. And they said they can have all the ice cream and milk that you can eat. So that's what I was having when I was talking about General Burger there when I was released. And what happened? The Chinese, when they and the North Koreans that was going back when they was exchanging prisoners, well, they thought they would be patriotic, and they was throwing their combat boots off and their clothes off. And I seen where we was coming down, so I said, "Well, I'll do the same thing." So I got to do that stuff off, and I took my shirt off and threw it off, and of course I kept my pants on, and that's how come they got my shirt. But
this is why you have no shirt on.
That's why I don't have any shirt on, because I got rid of mine just like they was doing. They didn't want anything to do with capitalism or clothes or whatever. So I pulled my shirt off, and that's.
I'm curious in this picture. What is this? Is this a small testament or what? This little book thing?
Yeah, that's a testament.
You just got that one?
I just got that. Yeah, that's what the general gave me.
I'm curious. What did you and the general talk about? Since we're on the picket, that initial.
He wanted to know how they treated men, how the Marines did. That was more about the Marines than anything else, and how many Marines was in there. And of course I told him, and of course I was with about 6 or 7 of those Marine pilots,
Mm-hmm.
And that Jerry Fink was a good friend of mine. In fact, this book here that he's got a lot of the quotations in there. It was from them officers and how they wrote it. And part of this book here, it's the Promised Marine Corps Prisoner of War in Korea. And it's all the Marine Corps that usually where they were taken prisoner and the dates and their names in there and the whole bit. And the Army didn't do that. The Marine Corps did, and I found out about it. And so I went and got it because it had my name in there, and that's where I met Drake Fink and the other guys. And so he carried the story on there, and he told about their detail there. And some of the names that kind of familiarized me, like I forgot about that Major Harrison. And he made it on that one. He got him a cane, makeshift cane, and he hobbled, and he rode the ox cart some, but he on that one leg, he made it on that trip.
The general, just the image of the general here. I mean, he seems like a genuinely nice guy.
Yeah,
I mean, just the look on his face. He looks like he is.
He really was, and he was the assistant commandant in charge
Mhm.
of the Marines in Korea. He was the next in charge, I think.
Did you ever feel? Because he doesn't convey. I mean, just looking at him, I've read that prisoners of war. There's an element. Why was I taken a prisoner? In a sense, I got. Was there any sort of sense? You shouldn't have been taken a prisoner. Did anyone ever express that to you?
Yeah, of course, they always think that. I know some congressmen made some story out, and see the POWs. They didn't get no treatment whatsoever from the VA when they got back. I mean, they can't take your word. They got to have proof. You can't just say I had this wrong and this wrong and go get treated, and they wouldn't accept it. So they had out in Las Vegas, they had a convention out there, Second World War POWs, and anyway, one of them was in a wheelchair, and one of the reporters asked him, was he getting treatment from the VA? And he says, hell no. He said, I'm not. Said, I've got this wrong, and I've got that wrong, and they won't accept me because everything happened over there, and I don't have proof that what I'll have. A lot of them didn't blaze legs. Like this one boy that I was telling that Billy Joe Buchanan had his arm half, and you see the bone in it, and I was with him on the way to march north, and I walked with him beside of him, and he had it was wrapped up, and after a while, it got infected, and there was maggots working in there. Well, the doctor told him later on that's the best thing could have happened to him because it took away the infection. So he, and one of the conventions I ran into him, and he couldn't straighten his hand out. It was like it messed his hand up. And he came back, and they did an operation on it, and he stayed and made a career out of it. And he was an ROTC instructor in Atlanta, I think. Down there, so he came back and made a career out of it and did well.
So when you after this sort of initial repatriation, what kind of debriefings did you have, or interrogations?
Yeah, they did on the way back. Like I told you, I weighed maybe 150, 55 pounds maybe, and gave us food then, vitamins and special food, and we gained weight. I think I gained 15 pounds in 14 days on the ship back, coming back. And the officers debriefed us, and we told them everything we knew and tried to tell about the guys that died and names and what have you. That's what they wanted to know. And they're still going back today and getting bodies and bringing them back and getting the DNA and finding out about some of them, But yet, to this day, they won't let them in the POW camps because that's where a lot of them was buried, and they won't let them back. They're going to the major battles and finding them, and they're trying to negotiate with them because they know that's where a lot of them buried. Yeah, not in the POW camp. In your sort of, was suspicion ever raised about your conduct when you were interrogated coming home? No, none whatsoever. You never felt that you were. No, I just told them. I said I was one of the reactions. In fact, there was more reactionaries in our camp because a lot of them came too. There was reactionaries, and like I say, I wouldn't even sign one of those forms that stated going to the United Nations that we got all this good treatment and all this and blah blah. It's all communist propaganda, and I refused to sign. And I told them that under no circumstance will I sign a lie, and they made me stand out in cold and without food and this type of thing. That was their means of punishment. They did have a lenient policy. policy. They didn't beat me, the Chinese did.
So you ended up not signing.
And I didn't sign it. No, I didn't. But a lot of them did.
Yeah.
And a lot of them regretted it too, because some of them was taped on TV, and it got back to all the communist countries. I mean, and by the way, we had a reporter that come in from, he was a communist,
Mm-hmm.
and I can't think of his name, but he was a reporter that came back. He was from England, reporter, communist, and he wrote all these stories and stuff that went back out to propaganda to the Iron Curtain countries and back there, and all that.
And all of the Marines remain reactionaries in your camp?
Yeah, everyone in died. I knew everyone.
Yeah, in your particular
Yeah,
camp.
my camp.
Was any service more likely to be progressive or reactionary? I mean, the Marines seem to be in the reactionary camp.
Seemed like it.
Or did it?
Seemed like every one of the guys was Army.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone was Army.
None were Air Force?
I don't think none of them.
Yeah.
All of them was Army.
So you never, in a sense, once you got back, you never had problems with the
I'll tell
FBI?
you what, no. There was some adjustment that I had to make to pick up certain words that that I had to adjust to. Not exactly this word, but you've not been around civilians or this type of thing. So I just let it slip 2 or 3 times, like at the dinner table, and I had a date with a girl and there's others around, and I made a statement, and I said, "Oh, I'm sorry," because I mean it was just an adjustment. And golly, we got back in San Francisco, and I mean all of a sudden there was a big adjustment. You got kind of tense and nervous, and you didn't want to talk about any of that stuff for a long time. Of course, a lot of guys when they retired, like I did. When I retired, it seemed like it hit me more. A lot of it then.
So
you
to say,
stayed busy working and what have you, and you didn't have time.
once you sort of had these sort of, you were sort of coming home, it sounds like you spent a lot of time, you were interviewed. And once you landed in the States, what then happened? I mean, you got...
Yeah, I seen girls with white rouge and lipstick, and which I wasn't familiar with, and the smell, and perfume, and it was just like another world, and there was some adjustment.
And then because you mentioned, did you get to go home before because you had to report back to duty, you said, for 3 months.
Yeah, and we got a 30-day convalescent leave, and I was home for 30 days before I had to go back to the Marine Corps, and I was stationed in Wellington, and yeah, there was some adjustment, and I had to get back in the routine of marching and the discipline part and what have you, which didn't take me long. In fact, I had to take the Navy and Marine POWs that we had in Memphis, that got in trouble, got able or something.
Yeah.
And I'd take them out to march them, and they would always ask for me because I was real lenient with them because after what I went through. And they weren't supposed to smoke, wasn't supposed to talk to them. And I'd go out and I'd say, at ease. And I'd say, "You guys want to smoke?" And I'd give them a smoke. And I was real lenient with it. And then I would ask me, "Hey," he said, "We like his cadence counts because we're back to marching, So they asked for me, so. But I was lenient.
Was that like a weird role to be in?
That was.
I mean, particularly no time for the most part.
We had this one Indian from South Dakota. I can't think. He was right up the gunny sergeant. And he was